Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to continue our college football predictions with Week 15, aka Conference Championship Week. And on Rivalry Week, I had a really good week. I went 27-5, which brings my total season record up to 211 to 106. Now, this is again Conference Championship Week, where we can see one conference they're in a play-in scenario. One team is in win or go home scenario. But I don't know. I feel like this week kind of is underwhelming, and you'll see what I mean in a bit. And before I get into the predictions, let me just go over a few teams that, in my opinion, are already where they stand in the college football playoffs. Let's talk about the teams that's already in. We have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, the Oregon Ducks, Penn State Nittany Lions, the Indiana Hoosiers, the Texas Longhorns, and the Tennessee Volunteers. I think they're in, they're protected. They don't have much to worry about. Now we have the teams that are likely in, which I do think they're in, but there is that 20% chance where something can go chaotically wrong. And those teams I think include the Georgia Bulldogs, the SMU Mustangs, the Ohio State Buckeyes, and the Boise State Broncos. Boise State would be in the end part, but they still got a conference championship game in which I don't know. That things can happen in that one. Just saying. And this is the up to fate group. This mostly these are the teams that are facing. It's going to be up to the committee to decide if they want to get in or not. And I think everyone's paying attention to them more than the teams that are already in. Who got, because I read an article that said 11 teams have already gotten their spots. There's one more available spot in the playoffs left, and it could go to any one of these teams. For the University of Miami, if they would have beaten Syracuse last week, they probably would have been in the likely in group. If But the three teams that everyone's talking about is Alabama, South Carolina, Ole Miss. And the only reason I threw BYU in is because they have two losses, but I think people already have them out because of their strength of schedule. Alabama, people want Alabama in some way somehow. Yes, they won last week against Auburn, but you got to remember this school had two pretty bad losses to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, and they had a good loss against Tennessee. For South Carolina, they're one of the hottest teams in the nation right now. Many feel like they deserve to get in, even though they have three losses and they lost to Alabama and Ole Miss. But they did beat Clemson last week. They beat a ranked Texas A&M team of the week, like weeks before. Right now, South Carolina has the most momentum going in, but due to their early schedule woes, I think that might play a problem with them. And then we have Ole Miss, in which, yes, they've got a good win against Georgia, but they had a bad loss with Kentucky at home at that. But they had a close loss to LSU, and then they had a close loss to Florida. I don't know if I count that as a bad loss or a good loss, but two of the three teams they lost to, they are in bowl play and they have decent records, 7-5 records respectively. Well, not LSU has an 8-4 record, but okay, whatever. Ole Miss, I mean Lane Kiffin. I also read that Lane Kiffin he had a very tough case for Ole Miss getting in, and he actually read and he did it, and he actually is not wrong. He's not wrong at all. But yeah, the Up to Fate crew, that's what everybody's going to keep their eye on heading into Tuesday. And yes, this video is filmed before the college football playoff ranking and unveiling. And I feel like this one's going to be very, very telling on where the playoffs is going. And in our last group, they only have just one shot left to get in, and that's to win or go home. And that's Clemson, thanks to them losing to South Carolina last week. If they would have beaten them, they might have would have moved up to the up to fate crew. And then you have Arizona State and Iowa State as those two teams will be playing in the Big 12 championship game. in which I will talk about in a minute. But that's where we stand at the playoffs. Just pay attention to my little rankings because they're going to have some weight on how I'm going to be picking the winners for this conference championship weekend. But before we get into those, I do want to go over some Group of Five conference championship games really quickly. Starting off with the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers and the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. And if I'm correct, those Gamecocks have not been in Division One school for very long. But for me, given that there are 4.5 favorites, very close favorites, a lot of these games this week within within like 5 points favored or 6 points favored. So that's something to keep your eye on as well. But I'm actually going to go with the Gamecocks to win in this game. Just know that anything can happen on conference championship weekend. I've seen some crazy things. And then we have the Army Black Knights taking on the Tulane Green Waves. Tulane had a great chance of making the playoff as a Group of Five school if a certain Boise State school finds a way to mess up. But on Thanksgiving night, they blew their chances against Memphis when they lost. Meanwhile, for the Army, they're actually favored by 6 points in this one. Very surprised. And going back and forth with this, they're already out of the playoff conversation after getting blown out by Notre Dame 2 weeks ago. But for the American Athletic Conference, in which, wait, Army has finally joined? Resident Independent like forever? I'm just going to roll with the Black Knights to win. I'm just going to roll with the favorite team to win this one. But I will not be surprised if Tulane pulls it off. Just something to think about. And then we have a really, really big one. Big one than you think. With the UNLV Rebels taking on the Boise State Broncos for the Mountain West title. Boise State is pretty much the leader of all the Group of Five schools. All they got to do is win this game, and they're in. But UNLV, that school can play spoilers as they've been in the top 25 for some time, for once upon a time before. And I know this game is going to be I think this one's going to be a good little Friday night game for us to watch. And I'm gonna go ahead and roll with Ashton Jeanty and the Boise State Broncos to win. I don't know if the Mountain West games is neutral site or if it's just go to the home team stadium. I think it's for them it's going to the home team stadium. If that's the case, Boise State should win by a lot. But if it's neutral site, I'm still gonna take Boise State, but in a much closer race. And now we have the Ohio Bobcats taking on the Miami of Ohio Redhawks in the Mid American Conference, aka the MAC. And like I said, I don't know much about these two schools. I'll go through them quickly. I'm gonna roll with Miami to win. And I know this is a neutral site game. They usually play in Detroit for their games. And now we have the game that everyone thought would be the game of the week, but I end up choosing differently. And that is the Georgia Bulldogs taking on the Texas Hook'em Horn Longhorns. Georgia last week taking on Georgia Tech. They got the win, but they needed 8 overtimes to get the job done. It was a long one. The offense struggled pretty much the first half. I believe they got shut out in the first half. They came all the way back in the second. At Georgia Tech, they just didn't get the job done. Meanwhile, for Texas, for the first game playing in Texas against Texas A&M since I think 2012 when no, it's 2011 was the last time they played because I remember Ryan Tannehill was on that team, and that was before A&M left for the SEC. This was the first game of the rivalry, and yeah, it was very low scoring and gritty, in which Texas pitched a shutout. Well, they would have pitched a shutout if Quinn Ewers didn't throw a pick six in that game. And looking at this game, Texas is 2.5 favorites. And remember my little chart that I showed. I said, because I think Texas is automatically in no matter what, do they rest starters here? It's something to start thinking about in this playoff era. this expanded playoff era. Some teams could be start resting their players for the big playoff push because they know they got to play at least 3 games, or some teams got to play 4 games to get to the national championship game. So right now, because I don't think Texas is gonna have that much urgency heading into this one, Georgia on the other hand, yes, they also have them in the likely in category as well, but I think Georgia has they want some they want a little assurance for themselves. I got the Bulldogs winning this one, just like they did earlier this year when these two teams played. Georgia was the only team to beat Texas this year. I think Georgia, and with this being in Atlanta, I do think they have a great shot at beating the Longhorns to secure safety in this one. Because if they lose, well, that's going to be something to discuss for Sunday. And then real quickly, we have the Sun Belt Conference where the Marshall Thundering Herds will take on the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. Really quickly, I'm going to roll with the Raging Cajuns to get it done. Although Marshall, I was very impressed with that double overtime victory over James Madison. And now we have the SMU Mustangs taking on the Clemson Tigers in the ACC Championship game. There's a lot on the line. And for SMU, they blew out Cal last week. Nothing spectacular. But Clemson, they lost to South Carolina at home for the second straight time South Carolina came to Death Valley and got the win. But this game for me is going to be very similar to what I've said about Georgia and Texas. SMU, in their mind, I think they're pretty much in. If they win, they're in. If they lose, I think they've done enough to secure them some safety. Although the College Football Playoff Committee isn't that biased with the ACC, given how mediocre this conference is at best, and I think that's going to come into play. I don't see SMU having a ton of urgency in this one. I'm going to go with the upset. I think Clemson is going to win, and that's going to cause some chaos in those playoff meetings. Just watch. And onto a game which there has no meaning whatsoever. We have the Penn State Nittany Lions taking on the number 1 ranked Oregon Ducks. Penn State getting a blowout win over Maryland last week, and Oregon getting a blowout win at home against Washington. And honestly, both these teams are in. I think neither team are going to be playing. They're just playing for conference supremacy. And this is another game where could teams be resting some players heading to this new playoff era. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip a coin, and the tails means I'm going with the road team. So I think Oregon's going to get their first loss in this one to Penn State. But yeah, this one can go in any direction. It depends on how Oregon comes out in this game. I'm just going to take Penn State on the upset for now. And that leads us to the game of the week. Iowa State and Arizona State. And the reason why I chose this game as game of the week over Georgia and Texas and Penn State and Oregon is because this game has a ton of on the line. This is win or go home. For these two teams, the playoff begins right now. For Iowa State, last week they got a win over Kansas State. And for Arizona State, they put the devil's stake in their rivals, the Arizona Wildcats, blowing them out 49-7. Now, this game, they are giving Arizona State 2 points in this one. And the fact that Arizona State will not have one of their best receivers for this game. I think he's going to be out. So that's going to play a factor. Arizona State right now, they are one of the hottest teams. Like South Carolina, they're the hottest. They're one of the hottest teams in the Big 12. But do this momentum come back and bite them? This is a game I'm going back and forth. I'm going back and forth with this one. Because Iowa State, they have proven that early in the season they had then they got off to like an undefeated start, but then they started to fall apart in a bit. Then before Arizona State picked things up. So this one, I'm going to limp because Arizona State is not going to have that starting receiver for this game. I'm going to go with the upset. I'm rolling with Iowa State to pull this off, and they'll get that finals conference champion spot in the Big 12 championship game. So that's where I'm at with these predictions. Tell me what y'all think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Gamble safely, and I'll see you next time.